When you think of the worst team in the NFL, which one comes to mind? Really think about it. Which NFL franchise has been the worst one in league history? Likely, the first team someone on the street would say is the Cleveland Browns. After all, they went 0-16 in 2017 and have only made the playoffs twice since the year 2000. But to be fair to them, they essentially had to restart as an organization back in 1999 after the original Browns moved to Baltimore back in the mid 90s. And besides, the team was relatively successful throughout much of their prior history up and through the 80s. What about the Detroit Lions, who went 0-16 back in 2008? Well, they too had their share of past successes, most recently in the 1990s. The Bucks, who started their existence going 0-26, have won 2 Super Bowls. The Jets have a title too, even if they hold the longest playoff drought in North American sports now. And honestly, they were pretty decent for most of their history, especially from the late 90s up to the 2010s. The Saints have been pretty putrid as well, but have seen much more success as of late, in no small part due to the careers of Sean Payton and Drew Brees. The point I'm trying to make here is that even if NFL franchises have had decent stretches of time where they've been poorly managed, run, or have just been downright bad, they won't stay that way forever. They will eventually find their way to success, even if they just so happen to accidentally stumble into it. However, there is an exception to this rule. While most teams have seen periods of failure and success at various points throughout their history, there actually is an NFL team that has been pretty terrible pretty consistently year in, year out. This team has actually been around since the league's inception back in 1920 and has been operating as an athletic club since 1898. This team's most successful era was either a 2-year run in the late 2000s where they made the Super Bowl or the years following World War II. This team has had a 75-year championship drought, which is the longest in professional sports. They have an all-time record of 588 wins, 800 losses, and 41 ties. Good for only around a 41% win rate. They are arguably the worst team in the league even this year, and they will continue to contend for that title for years to come. They're a team that's wandered the football world for 103 years without any sort of direction, consistency, or any real success, and one that will likely continue to do so in the future. Of course, I'm talking about the Arizona Cardinals, the black sheep of the league that the NFL doesn't want people to think about. Now, you might be thinking, why did I just describe the Arizona Cardinals in such a way? Have they really been that bad, that consistently throughout their 103 years of existence? It can't possibly be as bad as I'm describing, right? And hey, you're right. It's not as bad as I've described for the Cardinals. It's actually much, much worse. In over a century of existence, the Cardinals have only had 31 years where they've had a winning record. This team has won a whopping 5 division titles since 1948. They have made the playoffs only 11 times and have lost in their only Super Bowl appearance. 11. That's it. They've made the playoffs only 11 times. And they've been around for 103 years. Though, funnily enough, they are undefeated at home in the postseason, so that's something to hang your hat on. Oh, you want to know their specific playoff record at home? Alright, well, it's 5-0. A team that's 103 years old has had 5 home playoff games in their entire existence. But to be fair, though they might have had only 5 home playoff games in the 103 years that they've been around, they haven't lost a single one of them. Can you say the same about your team? Thought so. Getting right back on track here, the Cardinals have also had 2 years where they failed to win a single game, back in 1943 and 1944, though the latter was a merged team with Pittsburgh at the time. It's quite honestly astonishing to think about the magnitude of this level of ineptitude and failure, but this is the reality of the Arizona Cardinals, a team and franchise that are undoubtedly the worst in the history of the NFL and has not seen a single sustained run of success any longer than 2 to 3 years. It's actually quite fascinating to me, and it's something that I didn't completely understand. But as you'll see, there are reasons the Arizona Cardinals are the way they are. reasons that continue to plague the franchise to this day and into the foreseeable future. And really, these reasons involve all levels of the organization. Of course, whenever you talk about a team's success, or lack thereof, on the field, you have to start with the players that actually play for them. They are the ones on the field, after all, and the ones who directly determine the outcome of games. Unless you subscribe to the theory that the league is scripted, which, by the way, I totally do. And while we're on the topic, may I just point out that the NFL scriptwriters clearly either forgot about or just hate this team. Otherwise, they would have at least let them win that Super Bowl against the Steelers before banishing them back to football purgatory. Anyways, looking at the Cardinals' history of player development, whether we're talking about their time in Chicago, their time in St. Louis, or their time in Arizona, it quickly becomes clear that it's not a very good one. Aside from guys like Larry Fitzgerald, Pat Tillman, Aeneas Williams, Patrick Peterson, and kicking legend Jim Bakken, can you really name any Hall of Fame level talent, or really any talent this team has drafted and developed? Before anyone mentions that Kurt Warner was an Arizona Cardinal for a decent stretch of time, I'd like to point out that he joined the Cardinals during the back half of his career and is best known during his time with the Rams. Anquan Boldin was also good, but he's not a Hall of Famer. Besides, he's more known for his time with the Ravens and the Niners, where he actually got the chance to win something. Given that this team is the oldest continuously operating professional football team, again, operating since 1898 as the Morgan Athletic Club, the fact that the Cardinals only have maybe 5 to 6 players associated with the team that most fans would know about is shocking. But again, let's be fair here. The Cardinals are pretty old, so it's entirely possible that many of their better players and personnel might have just been from an era most modern football fans aren't familiar with, right? Well, given that there are currently 371 players, coaches, and personnel in the Hall of Fame, coupled with the sheer age and history of the Arizona Cardinals, compared to newer teams such as the Carolina Panthers or Houston Texans, you could reasonably expect quite a few of those names to be associated with the franchise. But that's not the case here. In fact, there are only 23 names who are linked to the Cardinals in any sort of way. That's not good for a team well over 100 years old. And when you look at the people associated with the franchise who are actually in the Hall of Fame, the picture gets worse. Looking at the current list of the 23 Cardinals players and personnel in the Hall of Fame today, only 14 of them played, coached, or were in an executive role after the year 1950. Of those guys, only 8, or a little more than half, actually spent a majority of their time with the Arizona Cardinals. The name of these 8: Charlie Trippi, Dick Lane, who's more associated with the Lions anyways, Ollie Madison, Jackie Smith, Roger Harrow, Larry Wilson, Aeneas Williams, and Dan Deerdorf played the majority of their games with the Cardinals. Players and coaches such as Don Coryell, Edgar N. James, Kurt Warner, and Emmitt Smith, who have the Cardinals listed as a team in their Hall of Fame bio and are technically associated with the franchise, spent most of their careers for other teams. And when you look at the Cardinals' draft history, it does not get any better. The first NFL draft was in 1936, and overall there have been 87 NFL drafts. On average, each NFL draft class has between 4 to 5 Hall of Fame level players, of course, assuming there are 371 players and personnel in the Hall of Fame. Over the course of a decade, therefore, we can expect to see about 42 to 43 Hall of Fame level players drafted into the league. Again, let me remind you that only 8 players in the Hall of Fame actually spent a majority of their time with the Cardinals franchise. So, on that notion, it'd be somewhat accurate to say that the Cardinals draft or develop only 1 Hall of Fame level player per decade. And that's really bad, especially when you consider that after the AFL-NFL merger in 1970 and the Seahawks joined the league in 1976, the NFL only had 28 teams up until around 1995. And using our earlier numbers, it would have been reasonable at the time to expect teams on average to draft around 1.3 Hall of Fame level players in any given decade. But it somehow gets worse as we get closer to the modern day. The team has only drafted 1 player since 1985 who has been inducted into the Hall of Fame. Well, 2, technically, once Larry Fitzgerald gets in. Now, who is that player? Aeneas Williams. Let me repeat that. The Arizona Cardinals have drafted 1 Hall of Fame player since 1985. 2, once Larry Fitzgerald gets in. But that's okay. During this time, the team also made sure to draft notable names such as Josh Rosen, Andre Wadsworth, Wendell Bryant, and Anthony Thompson to pad out the roster. And those are just some of the more famous players to grace the Cardinals roster since the team moved to Arizona back in '88. Meanwhile, they've also made sure to cut underperformers like DeAndre Hopkins, figuring they get nothing of value in return for these moves, while also eating nearly $23 million in cap hits. Nothing to worry about here, guys. Through all this absolutely elite roster management by the franchise throughout its long and obviously successful history, I can't help but keep asking myself the same question over and over again. How is a team this poor at player management for over 100 years? You would think they would have done something right, like at least once, or like gotten lucky and stumbled into a good player by chance. I mean, let's look at the Browns. They've been undeniably bad since they rejoined the league. Some of those rosters were pretty stacked, especially within the last decade. Joe Thomas, Nick Chubb, Myles Garrett are all pro players drafted by the Browns. Joe Thomas was just inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he's widely regarded as the best tackle in NFL history. For the Browns, their issues have mostly been due to the quarterbacks they've trotted out onto the field. Remember DeShone Kizer, the football love child of Cam Newton and Tom Brady? I do. The Cardinals, meanwhile, have had systematic issues in player management pretty much at every position, not just a quarterback. And then again, that's what happens when your team can only manage to identify and develop 3 Hall of Fame level talents over the course of a nearly 40-year period. And that leads us right into another reason why the Cardinals have been so consistently bad throughout their entire history. Their coaches and GMs, for the most part, are also not very good. In their history, the Arizona Cardinals have had 43 head coaches, 8 of which made the Hall of Fame following their time in the NFL. Though only half of them are in the Hall of Fame as coaches. And of those Hall of Fame coaches, only one has coached an NFL team after the year 1953, Don Coryell. And while he's won the Coach of the Year award in 1974 during his time with the Cardinals, Don is primarily associated with his work with the Chargers instead. Now, that isn't bad per se, but again, considering the team has had 43 coaches in its history and has been playing in the NFL in some capacity for 103 years, it's not great. On average, having 43 head coaches throughout their history translates to a new head honcho on the sidelines about every 2.4 years, or anywhere between 28 to 41 games depending on the era. Though, to be fair, looking at the list of coaches, particularly in the years 1920 to 1970, many were only coaching for 1 year, in no small part due to the nature of the NFL at the time. So the numbers are a bit skewed. So let's be fair and look at the coaches since 1970 instead. Since 1970, the Cardinals have had 17 head coaches, which translates to a new coach about every 3.11 years, or between 43 to 52 games depending on the era. So it's a little better, but if you are replacing your head coach around every 3 years, it doesn't really allow for any sort of consistency or stability on the sidelines, let alone a culture to take root in the organization. Again, the Cardinals had Don Coryell on the sidelines at some point. They've also had Bruce Arians, who helped the team to a 13-3 record, the best in its history. Those guys are skewing these numbers to look better than they are. Fun fact, Bruce Arians has 49 wins with this franchise, a team record. The coach with the second most wins in Cardinals history, Ken Whisenhunt, who went 45-51 with the team. But hey, the Cardinals made the Super Bowl under him, and it definitely wasn't just because they got to play rookie Matt Ryan, Jake Delhomme, and Donovan McNabb in the playoffs. They definitely didn't fold the second they ran into a somewhat competent quarterback-coach combination. No, they did not. Other notable Cardinals head coaches after 1970 include Buddy Ryan, after he was chased out of Philadelphia, Dennis They Are Who We Thought They Were Green, the ultimate scapegoat in Steve Wilkes, Cliff Kingsbury, who has essentially moved to Thailand following the 2022 season, and Jonathan Gannon, who was so bad at his job that the Eagles literally left him in Arizona following the Super Bowl. Oh, and by the way, the Cardinals also, so desperate to get Jonathan Gannon, smalled him illegally. What a fun list! None of these coaches had a winning record, and most were quickly out of the league following their time with the Cardinals. The GM list is not much better either, headlined by names such as Larry Wilson, Buddy Ryan? What? Buddy was the GM too? Oh boy. Anyways, all you need to know is that Steve Keim, who was just forced to step down from his position as GM back in January, might have actually been the best GM in this team's history. No, I am not kidding. Let's also not forget that these are the same people that ultimately are in charge of drafting and identifying many of the players on the roster, as well as hiring the coaches. And as mentioned earlier, the Cardinals are not very successful at those things. But ultimately, all of the disappointing seasons, all of the playoff droughts, all of the lack of direction stems from the people above the players, the coaches, and management. It comes from the very top. And with that, it's time to talk about ownership. From the year 1933 until today, the Cardinals franchise has been a family-run operation, owned by the Bidwell clan. And today, the team is currently owned by Michael Bidwell, whom, as of late, has been accused of a number of unsavory things. And that's just outside of football. On the field, his team has been accused of cheating heavily during his tenure. I mean, it ultimately wouldn't surprise me if that one's true, especially given that this is the same team that made illegal hiring calls just to bring in Jonathan Gannon as their head coach. So clearly, the team doesn't have very high standards here. And if these cheating accusations are true, then clearly whatever the Cardinals have been doing under Bidwell has not been working well for the team, as they have an exemplary record of 27-34 during his ownership tenure. But let's be fair to the guy. 27-34 is actually one of the better records that an owner of this team has had. In fact, the Cardinals have had a losing record under every single Bidwell owner except for one. So for Michael Bidwell to have a 27-34 record isn't really surprising. More like it's par for the course. Well, unless you are that one Bidwell owner who had a winning record, Charles Bidwell Jr. He had an all-time record of, get this, 66 wins, 65 losses, and 9 ties as an owner. He's one win over 500, so technically that is a winning record. Kudos to you, Charles. Oh, and in case you were wondering what happened to Charles, he was forced to sell his share of the team after a dispute with his brother in 1972. Yeah, you heard that right. The only Bidwell owner with an actual winning record with his team was forced to sell. I cannot make this stuff up, man. But then again, is it really that surprising? I mean, under the Bidwells, the Cardinals have won a whopping 5 division titles and have made the playoffs a grand total of 11 times. Again, this team is 103 years old. I mean, they did have that championship in 1947, so I guess there's a silver lining somewhere here. Like, is ownership actually trying to lose here? Like, are they actively trying to lose every year? Like, for the past 100 years? Because that's the only explanation I can come up with to rationalize these kinds of results. Like, it's astonishing. Dan Snyder, one of the most reviled owners in NFL history, and someone who was so bad that the league literally forced him out, won 4 division titles and made the playoffs 6 times during his tenure in Washington. Yes, Dan Snyder, widely considered one of the worst NFL owners ever, would have easily been the most successful owner in Cardinals history from a football perspective. Let that one sink in for a sec. But don't just take my word for all this. Let's see what the players have to say about ownership. What? He ranks the lowest in the league? But Dan Snyder owned Washington when this poll was taken. I just don't get it. The players ranked Dan Snyder above Michael Bidwell? Really? Who could have possibly guessed this would be the outcome? Not me. That's for sure. This is unbelievable. I have, no words at this point. Wow. Just, wow. It's hard to believe, but this is true, and really, these issues go beyond football. Just to throw out an example of what I mean, the Cardinals are the only team in the NFL that have their players currently pay for their meals, which is not a normal practice in the sports world, let alone the NFL, where nutrition is absolutely key to performance. So yeah, ownership isn't exactly great. And it only gets worse once you look into the team's finances. Currently, the Arizona Cardinals rank 30th in the league in revenue. And though market size does have a part to play in all of this, The investments ownership ultimately puts into the team, as well as the Cardinals brand, does as well. I mean, the Phoenix Suns are in the same market as the Cardinals, which has at least 5 million people, and rank much closer to the center of the pack in NBA team value, ranking 13, beating out teams in bigger markets, such as the Washington Wizards. And if you look at the Forbes financial breakdown from last year further and compare the Cardinals to the league average for similarly valued teams, their numbers look absolutely awful. On average, teams valued similarly as the Arizona Cardinals can attribute about 75.5% of their brand value to just being in the NFL and being a football team. About 11% of their value is due to their market size, 9.2% due to the stadium that they play in, and the remaining 4.3% is from something called their brand. This number is the one that I want to focus on, and it can be attributed to things such as promotions, marketing, and culture surrounding the team. But from a financial perspective, it can basically be assumed that this is how much money ownership is investing back into the team. For the Cardinals, they're currently valued at around $3.3 billion, and the breakdown is as follows. That's relatively in line with the less valuable teams in the league if we go just by dollar value and percent valuation breakdowns. But the issues start to show up when you look at the market size of the immediate areas that these teams play in and start to break these numbers down further. Looking at the average market size for the 10 least valuable NFL franchises, on average, we're talking about 2.5 to 2.6 million people in those markets. Considering that the brand value for these teams average at around $148 million, this means that the teams on average are spending around $70.60 per person in their market. For the Cardinals, their immediate market contains 5.1 million people, around double that average. Yet, if you look at it, the Cardinals brand is only worth $160 million. This translates to $31.37 per person in your market for your brand value, or less than half of the normal value for the lower rated NFL teams. And really, what looking at the Cardinals' financials and the relative amount of money ownership is spending on the team when looking at their market size says is this. Ownership does not care about winning or about the image of the Arizona Cardinals. You heard me right. The owners of the Arizona Cardinals don't actually care if their team succeeds. And that's a heavy accusation I just made. But when you look at what other teams do in comparison to them, this conclusion might not be an inaccurate one. As I already showed, the Bidwells are putting less money back into their teams and their markets than their contemporaries are. And that alone can be interpreted as them not being nearly as invested in their team's success as other owners are. And yes, while the Cardinals do have around $240 million tied up in player expenses, which is in line with every other team in the league, with the average at around $243 million, that really doesn't mean anything. As I mentioned in my earlier video on this channel talking about the NFL salary cap, the league financial rules basically force every team to be within a strict range when spending on players for the sake of parity, as well as for management of the NFL's overall finances. In addition, that $240 million number is very easily manipulated by pulling money forward into the present or pushing out into the future. So the fact that the Cardinals spend roughly a similar amount on their roster as every other NFL team is a non-factor here when talking about ownership commitment to the team. As far as I'm concerned, that's a required thing for the Bidwells to do to even keep the Arizona Cardinals under their ownership. And looking at the average league spend on brand paints a similarly bleak picture for the Cardinals as when we just looked at the less valuable franchises alone. The NFL average spend on brand per person in market is $79.88. In fact, the only teams in the league that invest less per person than the Cardinals do are the Detroit Lions and the Los Angeles Chargers. Some other teams, such as the Bears, Dolphins, and Jets, come close to being as cheap as the Cardinal ownership in regards to spending on market. But overall, 26 out of the 32 teams in the NFL spend at least $40 per person in their market just on their brand. For example, the Browns and owner Jimmy Haslam, who are in an area with a listed metro population of 2 million people, which is less than half of Arizona's 5.1 million people, have invested $201 million into the team brand. Or just looking at the pure numbers, $41 million more into the team than the Cardinals and Michael Bidwell have. This translates to a whopping $100.50 per person, or 7th most in the league. Or, if you want to put it in terms of Arizona Cardinals, $69.13 more per person than Michael Bidwell and the Cardinals are spending. The Browns have actually put their money where their mouth is, and honestly speaking, it's really quite admirable from them. Especially considering the team's recent history. Question the Browns' decision-making, question their personnel all you want, but really, you shouldn't ever question the fact that ownership desperately wants to win and promote themselves to their fan base as a good team. They genuinely care about winning up in Cleveland. And another example of this is the Cowboys. Jerry Jones cares so much about his team and his brand image that he's literally spent over $1 billion just to maintain the Cowboys. That's an unimaginable amount of money to drop on a team that's won just 4 playoff games this century. Yet Jerry Jones, despite all of his faults as an owner, does just that. Because he cares. But let me ask you this now. Why should the Bidwells care about winning, or really about the Arizona Cardinals' success? Think about it, and think about it hard. I mean, the Arizona Cardinals still have $467 million in revenue, and they are still valued at $3.3 billion despite all their failings. And at the end of the day, the team is still making the Bidwells a ton of money. So really, what's their motivation to change things up here? Pride isn't a factor. And because of this, and as a result of this attitude by ownership, that kind of thinking has permeated throughout the Cardinals organization in every single facet. It really breeds a culture of losing and failure, and it has for 103 years. And if ownership doesn't care about team success, which they clearly haven't, why should management? The coaches? The players? It's a vicious cycle, and until something changes, ultimately at the top, this team will never truly be able to succeed. And you want to know what the worst part about all of this is? The Bidwells have owned this team for nearly a century, so they're not exactly going anywhere here, barring some major controversy the league can't possibly ignore. So things aren't likely going to change for the better for the Cardinals, both now and in the future. So there we have it. The Cardinals are forever cursed to be terrible and irrelevant in the NFL. They are a team that has failed to acquire enough talent on the field to truly compete, a team plagued by coaches and GMs that continue to fail to win and are regularly replaced, and are a franchise held hostage by poor ownership that doesn't care about the team's success so long as they can still make money at the end of the day. They're in an endless spiral of failure with no way out. But it's not like this is a new problem for the Cardinals that I've described. It's always been like this for them since their inception. They're this headless chicken of an NFL franchise doomed to run around into irrelevance with no real direction or hope. They've been like this in the past, they're like this right now in the present, and chances are they'll continue to be like this well into the future. The story of the Cardinals is that of 103 years of failure. It's a tragic tale for the ages, still unfolding before our very eyes, with no end in sight. Well, I guess all I have to say is this. Brace yourself, Cardinals fans. After all, it might take another century before things get any better for you. Thanks for watching.
4 picks against Grossman and 2 fumbles. What did you see about the Bears? We shut them down that way?
No, we just the Bears are what we thought they were. What we thought they were. We played them in preseason. Who the hell takes a third game in a preseason like it's bull? We played them in the third game. Everybody played 3 quarters. The Bears are who we thought they were. And that's why we took the damn field. Now, if you want to crown them, then crown their ass. But they are who we thought they were. And we let them off the hook.